The Broken Covenant of the Spire. Prologue. In the age when the sky above Karrion Spire was a bruised violet, and the streets below were a labyrinth of cracked brick and rusted steel, I set my quill upon the parchment that would become this tale. The city fortress is a place where faith and power are intertwined as tightly as iron chain. It is here that I witnessed a sacrifice not of flesh, but of conscience. A choice made by a man whose name has been whispered in hushed tones across taverns and alleyways alike. Marin Kess. I remember the night it all began, though the memory itself is a brittle thing, like a candle sputtering under wind. The city was shrouded in a perpetual twilight. Lanterns flickered with a cold, electric blue glow that illuminated the grimly glidden walls of the slums. The air smelled of oil and tar, mingled with the distant scent of incense from the cathedral of the Shattered Seal. Marin Kess was no ordinary citizen. He had once been a scholar in the great library of Spire, known for his relentless curiosity about the ancient covenant that bound the realm's magic to its people. His research had unearthed truths that many would rather keep buried. Secrets about the very fabric of reality, woven by the gods themselves. It was this knowledge that drew the eyes of the high priests and the ironclad soldiers who guarded them. Chapter 1. The Whispering Walls. The first chapter of our story begins in a narrow alley, dimly lit by a single lantern held aloft by an old woman named Mira. She is a keeper of secrets, a weaver of lies and truths alike. The walls are covered with faded proclamations, sacrificed to keep the city safe. A faint hum pulses through them, not a sound, but a vibration that seems to seep into your bones. Marin had sought her out because he needed a place to hide his research notes, for fear of the council's eyes. The old woman offered him shelter in exchange for one thing: a promise to return with something that would seal the breach between worlds. Marin's eyes widened. He did not know what she meant by breach, but the urgency in her voice was palpable. "Listen, young scholar," Mira whispered, leaning close. "The gods are restless now. The covenant is fraying at its edges. If it is to be mended, a sacrifice must be made." Marin stared at her, his mind racing through possibilities. Could this be the secret he had sought? Or was it an ominous threat? He decided to follow her. Chapter 2. The Temple of Echoes. The old woman led Marin through a maze of narrow passages until they reached a hidden door that opened into the Temple of Echoes, a place no one in Karrion Spire had ever spoken of open. Inside, the walls were lined with carvings of angelic beings, intertwined with serpentine figures, all humming with an ancient resonance. The temple was silent, except for the faint echo of Marin's own footsteps. He felt as though he were walking into his own mind, a place where thoughts and memories could become tangible. As he entered, a chill swept through him, not from cold, but from the weight of unseen eyes watching. At the center of the temple stood an altar carved with runes that glowed faintly blue. An elderly priest, named Elias, not to be confused with the narrator, approached Marin. He was known as the last keeper of the original covenant secrets, though he had long since abandoned his role. "I have been waiting for you," Elias said. "The city needs a new pact, one that will bind our souls to the very essence of the spire itself." Marin swallowed. He had come here seeking knowledge, not a path to ruin. But Elias was relentless. He offered Marin an offer: your research, your mind, use it to forge a new covenant that would bring stability and safety to all. In exchange, he demanded that Marin sacrifice his own will for the greater good. Marin's heart hammered against his ribs. The weight of his decision pressed on him like a stone in his gut. He realized then that the city itself was an organism with its own needs, its own suffering, and its own desire to survive at any cost. The choice lay before him: keep his knowledge and live, or sacrifice it, and perhaps himself, for the salvation of all. Chapter 3. The Broken Covenant. In the weeks that followed, Marin's mind was consumed by a single thought. What does it mean to sacrifice one's will? He began to understand that the city had a long history of demanding such sacrifices from its citizens. But the scale and depth of this particular bargain were unprecedented. The council convened in the great hall, where marble columns rose up like skeletal fingers. High priests spoke with voices that seemed to echo off the walls, speaking about the binding of souls. Marin was summoned as a witness, an unwilling participant, to the forging of the new covenant. The council's plan was simple. Each citizen would give a fragment of their own essence, a piece of memory, a dream, or a wish, and in return, the city would be granted protection from whatever menace lay beyond its walls. The threat? A shadow that had been creeping through the cracks between worlds for centuries, waiting to devour all that stood in its path. Marin's mind raced as he listened. He realized that each piece of soul given to the covenant was a sacrifice, not of body, but of identity. It was an abstract cruelty, more psychological than physical. Yet, there were those who argued it was a necessary price for survival. He began to see the city in two parts: the bright, shining towers where the priests and nobles lived, and the dark, smoldering alleys where ordinary folk struggled. The latter would be spared by the covenant, the former would bear the brunt of sacrifice. Marin felt the sting of this inequality like a knife wound. Chapter 4. A choice between sorrow and hope. Marin's heart grew heavy as he watched people sign their names onto parchment, documents that contained not only their personal data, but also their memories, their dreams. He could see the faces of his friends in the slums. Nora the baker, who had lost her husband, Joran the blacksmith, whose son was ill, and Sira, a young woman with a bright smile that now seemed to dim. The city's safety would be guaranteed if the covenant were fully forged, but at what cost? The council's words rang in his ears: "We do not ask for your life, only for the remnants of you." He realized the true horror was not physical harm. It was an erosion of humanity itself. Yet, the alternative was a city overrun by darkness, its people living under a permanent shadow. He stood at the threshold of the Temple of Echoes again. The old woman Mira had warned him about the gods being restless. Perhaps she had known this would be his greatest test. He could either give himself up to the covenant and ensure safety, or refuse and risk everything, including his own life and the lives of all who depended on the city's stability. He was torn between despair and hope. His mind was a battlefield, each side screaming for what seemed right. Chapter 5. Under I. The breaking point. The final ritual took place under the full moon that night, the one that had always been considered an omen in Karrion Spire. The city's air thickened with anticipation. People gathered around the central plaza, where a massive stone altar rose from the ground, etched with symbols of old. Marin stood at the altar, surrounded by other willing participants. He was no longer the scholar who had entered the temple. He was a man bearing the weight of an entire city's conscience. The high priests recited incantations that vibrated through his bones, binding his thoughts to the covenant. The words were not spoken loudly, but felt as a hum in the air. He could feel every memory he'd ever held, from childhood dreams of soaring like a bird to the pain of watching loved ones die. He knew what it meant to give something up for the greater good. Yet, as his mind opened, he realized that the covenant was not simply a contract, but an entity itself, feeding on each fragment it absorbed. A sudden thought pierced him. What if I refuse? What if the darkness takes hold? The fear surged like a wave of cold water against his chest. He considered the idea that perhaps the sacrifice could be a misdirection. Maybe the council was using this ritual to manipulate everyone into giving away their souls, while the real threat remained hidden. In that moment, he had to decide: to submit and let the city survive at the cost of its soul, or to refuse, risking all in a hope for something better. Chapter 6. The Unfinished Covenant. The ritual reached its climax as the high priests raised their hands. A swirl of blue light erupted from the altar, engulfing Marin. He felt his memories, each one like a bright star, being pulled into the vortex. His heart beat faster, his breath quickened. As the light grew brighter, he could hear faint whispers, not from the gods, but from those who had come before him. He realized then that the covenant was never finished. The city's safety would be temporary, a fragile shell that would crack again when the next shadow emerged. He thought of the future generations who would live in a world where people gave up their identities to keep them safe. In the end, he chose to sacrifice his memory. He felt the last ember of hope die as it was absorbed into the covenant's growing darkness. Yet, beneath that act lay an unspoken question. Could this sacrifice truly protect the city? Or would it merely bind its people in a cycle of endless self-denial? When the light faded, Marin stood alone, his eyes hollow but not empty. The high priest smiled, or perhaps their smiles were just reflections of the city's sorrow. The citizens cheered, chanting, "Blessed be the covenant." Their voices rang like bells over the city's walls. Chapter 7. Aftermath. In the days that followed, Karrion Spire remained safe from the looming darkness. But the people began to feel a strange emptiness. They could not remember certain moments of their lives, those which had been offered up for safety. The old woman Mira watched as the city's joy was replaced with quiet desperation. Marin, now a ghost of his former self, walked through the streets in search of the memories he'd lost. He encountered Nora, whose bakery no longer smelled like fresh bread because she could not remember how to bake. He saw Joran struggling to forge weapons, as if some part of his skill had been taken. The city's beauty dulled, not because it was destroyed, but because its people were robbed of the spark that made them who they were. He realized that the covenant was a double-edged sword, a shield against external threats, but also a weapon against internal identity. The sacrifice had bought them safety, but at what price? He thought about his own future, whether he would ever regain those memories or live forever as a hollow echo. Chapter 8. Ambivalent conclusion. The story ends on an ambiguous note. While the city remains safe for now, Marin's fate is uncertain. Will he recover? Will the covenant hold long enough to protect against new threats? Or will the city crumble under its own weight of lost selves? Epilogue. Die. Is it ever worth sacrificing one's soul for the greater good? Or does every sacrifice create an unending chain of self-denial that ultimately destroys what we are meant to protect?